Morning to you, friends. It is good to be gathered together with you for worship here in this place. There will be a fuller recognition next Sunday, but I do want to say that on September the 1st, 2009, 10 years ago to the date, Lee Summit Christian Church called the Reverend Matthew Silvers to serve in this place and with this community. And so today, and more fully next Sunday, we celebrate 10 years of ministry in Lee Summit. And I can't think of anyone who offers more of their love to God and to congregation, to community, to family than Reverend Matthew Silvers. Would you give him a... Would you pray with me? Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each heart be found acceptable in your sight, God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. What expectations do you have on a Sunday morning? What motivated you to be here with us in this place? What is your reason for being here? I can imagine a few. I bet some of you are weary and you're worn and you have come seeking God's comfort and rest. I bet some of you are depleted spiritually. You have come to be refilled. I can imagine some arrive seeing the rapid change around their community or the pain in the world and have come to a familiar place to find their balance, to catch their breath. I believe some of you express your love of God in and through worship and have come to sing and to pray, to gather at the welcome table, to find your soul soaring in special music, and to tolerate 20 minutes of mediocre preaching. Maybe you're here because a parent or a spouse said that you had to. Sorry. Or this is your community and you needed to be with and among your people. Whatever your expectation or your motivation or your reason for being here this morning, I doubt that many, if any of you said, I'm headed to worship this morning to be challenged and unsettled. I'm heading to church to have my understanding of God and the world flipped on end. I'm headed to church to be agitated and provoked, confronted, and disturbed. And yet this is exactly what the parables are meant to do. Amy Jill Levine writes that religion has been defined as designed to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. Have you heard that before? And we do well to think of the parables of Jesus as doing the afflicting. And she goes on to caution us. If we hear a parable and think, I really like that, or worse, fail to take any challenge, we're not listening well enough. The parables of Jesus are usually simple, but they are anything but straightforward. Some of them are well developed narratively with unfolding plot and detailed setting, exploring a depth and range of characters. Some of them are a single sentence, a verse or two. The parables of Jesus usually contain the commonplace, the everyday, a vineyard, a seed, a parent, a child, a pearl, a loaf, a widow, a judge. And yet these common everyday elements draw us alongside the uncommon and the divine, the mysterious, the unknowable, the kingdom of heaven. The parables are story, the parables are metaphor, and the parables are contextual. And the parables expose and attack conventional myths and common wisdom, and they shock and give offense. or at least they should. Yet because of their surface level simplicity, we're quick to assign them meaning, to allegorize the parables and reduce them to an object lesson or to a moral teaching is to do them an injustice. So this is part of our challenge to you over the next 5 weeks as we begin a series on parables. If you hear the preacher say, "This parable means," or "the point of this parable is," you should protest kindly and gently, and preferably after worship. You should protest that the parables have no one singular meaning and cannot be reduced down to one identifiable point. The point or the meaning of a parable is the parable itself, which is why they're so challenging to our faith and even more challenging to preach. And yet, even as they do not have one meaning, that does not mean the opposite, that we can allow them to mean anything we like. But within the constraints of our language, to describe God or point toward the kingdom of heaven, parables are one of the best tools of faith that we have to employ. So we might start then with a parable that you've likely never heard before. We'll do it as a test run, if you will. A parable that isn't even in the Bible so that we can practice together. Listen in closely with me. It was very early in the morning, the streets clean and deserted. I was on my way to the railroad station. As I compared the tower clock with my watch, I realized it was already much later than I had thought. I had to hurry. The shock of this discovery made me feel uncertain of my way. I was not very well acquainted with the town as yet. Fortunately, there was a policeman nearby. I ran to him and breathlessly asked him the way. He smiled and said, "For me, you want to learn the way?" "Yes," I said, "since I cannot find it myself." Give it up," said he, and turned away with a great sweep, like someone who wants to be alone with his laughter. What shall we make of this parable? It has broad familiarity. We can all think of situations where time has gotten away from us, or our clocks didn't align. We can perhaps think of a place and the associated feeling of kind of knowing your way around, but not really. You can feel within your own body the tension and anxiety begin to increase as the parable progresses, as the urgency increases, as the despair heightens. The clock is ticking, the town is unfamiliar, the person is going to be late for work or miss an appointment or lose their train, and finally, a policeman appears. Surely he knows the directions. Surely he is able to help, and our bodies begin to relax. In this moment, our muscle memory kicks in and our guard lets down because we know how the story will end. The policeman will say, "Your destination is close. 2 blocks down, 1 block left. You have time. I'm glad to help. Have a nice day." And at the moment we have the parable figured out, it evades our grasp. The traveler asks the way, and we might note in passing that they do not add to the railroad station. Sally McFaig notes we are unprepared for the answer and even more disturbed. We're dumbfounded even by the final reply, "Give it up. Give it up." The realism of the story has been cracked, and through it we glimpse something. But what? As soon as we assign the story meaning, it is ruined. As soon as we draw a conclusion, we have to start over again. As soon as we say, "Well, the parable means this," the parable itself interrupts us and says, "Oh, well, how about this?" Parables are meant to draw questions, not to offer answers. They're meant to deepen wonder, not solidify meaning. And this is at the same time both maddening and comforting. It's maddening because it seems like a puzzle that's missing a final piece or a movie that's missing the last 5 minutes. We do not like to leave things unresolved. We want to know the answer. We want to solve the riddle. We want to be in the know. And yet the parable is comforting. It does not need to be solved. It does not have an answer. It is a gift. It does not demand or require anything of us. It is an invitation, an offer. It is a calling. Now that we are biblical and parable experts, you and I, we're ready to engage the biblical text. From Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 and 45. Hear these words. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. We might begin with the similarities. After all, these parables happen one right after another. So what is the same? They both begin similarly. The kingdom of heaven is like. Not all parables begin this way, but many of them do, and it's an immediate clue to the ear that we're about to hear a parable. And the parable will suggest or reveal or point towards something about the kingdom of heaven. This is what the word parable means. Para, beside, baleen, to throw. Here are two different things thrown side by side for comparison. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. The temptation in this moment is to interpret too quickly. We might be tempted to say, well, both parables are about seeking and finding. Both parables are about giving up all that one has in order to possess one thing of great value, which might lead us to say, part of Christian discipleship is to give up our many possessions, our precious time, our limited energy in order to possess the kingdom of heaven. Live sacrificially in order to possess the kingdom of heaven. You can hear the sermon now, can't you? Following Jesus requires sacrifice, but the payoff is eternal. Your earthly sacrifice is worth the heavenly reward. The search is worth the struggle. All for that beautiful instant when we find Jesus. You are the investor. God is the treasure hidden in a field. Jesus is the real estate agent. You are the merchant. God is the pearl of great value. This is easy, right? Next parable, please. I thought the preacher told us that these would be tricky. You line them up. We'll knock them down. And yet, what might the challenges be of such an interpretation? Are we saying that our entrance into the kingdom of heaven can be purchased? Bought like a field? Purchased like a pearl? Well, that doesn't seem to fit. Are we saying that the kingdom of heaven is something to be owned, singularly possessed? That doesn't feel right either. David Buttrick cautions us. The sermon that preaches we must give up everything to possess the kingdoms of God is a theological disaster. Or how about this? Did the one who purchased the field do so ethically? Should they have told the previous owner just what they had? Would it be like going to a garage sale and finding an old dusty painting only to discover that it was a Rembrandt or a Matisse. And going to the homeowner asking, "Well, what do you want for this dusty old painting?" "Oh, that thing, I found it in my grandmother's attic. How about $20? Shouldn't I ask them if they know just what they have? Shall we purchase the kingdom of heaven out of under the feet of others unawares? Or take the pearl of great value. This time the merchant didn't swindle anyone. He's a salesman. He has an eye for value. And yet, having sold all that he had and bought it, where will his next meal come from? Will the salesman now mark up the price of the pearl for his own wealth and gain? Is the kingdom of heaven a trophy to be displayed or an investment to gain value with interest? Ask differently. Is the kingdom of heaven God's gift to be offered and received only by grace? Or is it earned or purchased or gained or merited like the field or the pearl? Is the kingdom found by intentional seeking like the merchant in search of fine pearls? Or is it stumbled upon unawares like the treasure in the field? Do I have to know what I'm looking for in order to find the kingdom? Or does the kingdom happen upon me when I least expect it? What do these parables teach about the kingdom of heaven? How do they disrupt and agitate, help us reimagine the world? So what say you, wise disciples and faithful interpreters? The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. Thanks be to God this day.